Welcome, thrill seekers. You are tuned in on Sinister Radio. Whether you're sleepless, seeking a connection to the eerie, or simply the comfort of company when the night feels a little too quiet, Sinister Radio is here for you. Tonight I will tell 4 unsettling bedtime stories, each one more eerie than the last. Bedtime stories are meant to lull you into sleep, to bring comfort, warmth, and peace before drifting into dreams. But tonight, our stories will do something different. It depends on how much you enjoy the eerie. I can't see into the future, but I have a feeling that these stories will make you question every shadow in your room, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against your window. These bedtime stories will make you question what is real and what might be a figment of your own fear-driven mind. Questions like, is it real? Or is it just the darkness creeping into your mind? Are you ready to step into the dark and sinister? Then dim the lights, settle in, and let the darkness in. Tonight's first story is called, He Hides in the Dark. Ethan had been home alone all evening, buried in homework. His only company was the ticking clock on the wall and the occasional hum of the fridge. By the time he finished, the house felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to press in on him. He made a quick dinner, watched some TV, and at some point, exhaustion overtook him. He dozed off on the couch, the flickering glow of the screen painting restless shadows across the room. Then he fell asleep and began to dream. In his dream, he saw himself on the couch just as he was now. The front door creaked open so slowly, revealing the dark outline of a man standing in the doorway. The figure stepped inside without a sound. Ethan tried to move, to wake himself up, but he was frozen. Trapped in his own body, the man looked around the room, but not at Ethan. Then with slow, deliberate footsteps, he began to move around the house. Ethan wanted to scream, but his throat was sealed shut. Some seconds later, Ethan forced himself up. He needed to check the house for the intruder. He moved through the darkened house. His body felt tired and his vision blurred. He knew someone was in the house with him, hiding, in the dark. He searched the kitchen, empty. The hallway, empty. His closet in his bedroom, but it was also empty. Then, he reached the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. He turned on the light, and slowly, he pushed the door open, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Panic seized him. He saw the man who just entered the house was hiding in the bathtub. Crouched, like he was hiding, his back was turned to Ethan. The man in the tub was quiet and trying to be as small as possible. Ethan couldn't move. Ethan took a step back and then he tried to run. His feet felt sluggish, as if he were walking through water. Then, without warning, the man spun around and started chasing him. Ethan couldn't run, his legs felt too heavy. The man reached out, his fingers inches from Ethan's neck, and then he grabbed him. Ethan jolted awake, his heart pounding in his chest. He gasped for air, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The room was still, the TV playing some low, droning infomercial. Just a dream, he muttered, but his voice wavered. His breath was shaky as he sat up. Ethan had a strange feeling. He wasn't sure that it had just been a dream. He had a feeling that there was a man hiding in his house, who had snuck in while he was sleeping. The weight of the dream clung to him, thick and suffocating. It felt too real. He knew it was stupid. But the strange feeling didn't leave. That horrible, creeping sensation of being watched while sleeping still clung to him. His body felt wrong, like something had been near him, too near. So he needed to check the house before going to bed, just to be sure. Moving through the darkened house, he flicked on lights as he went. Living room, empty. Kitchen, nothing. The closet in his bedroom, empty. He hesitated at the bathroom door, staring at the closed curtain. His stomach twisted. He reached out, fingers shaking. He yanked it back. Nothing. The bathtub was empty. Ethan let out a breathless, nervous laugh. Just a dream. That's all. Just a bad dream messing with his head. He turned to go back to the living room. He decided to go to bed, so he turned off the lights in the house and ended up in the hallway. He wanted to make sure the door was locked before heading to bed. That's when he saw it. The front door. It was open, slightly ajar, but he had locked it after entering the house earlier. He was sure he had locked it. He always did when he was home alone. Ethan's stomach twisted. His breath came shallow, his skin cold. He forced himself to move, to step forward. He peeked out into the night, nothing but darkness and an empty street. But as he shut the door and turned the deadbolt, one thought crawled into his mind, making his skin crawl. Had it been open the whole time? Or had someone just left? Now it's time for the next bedtime story. You might want to keep your lights on for this one. The second story is called The Face in the Window. The apartment across from Lily had a window directly facing hers. A big window on the third floor, always closed, with beige curtains that never seemed to move. She never saw anyone in that apartment in the daytime. No lights, no movement, nothing. Until she saw the face for the first time. It was around 8 p.m. when she first noticed it. A dark figure standing in the window, looking directly at her. The apartment remained almost completely dark, yet she could see the figure. A figure of a man. Lily stared for a long time, waiting for him to turn away, to move, to do anything. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching, looking at her. She shuddered and pulled her curtains shut. The next night he was there again. Same spot, same expressionless face in the dark. By the third night, she started feeling uneasy in her own home. She told herself it didn't matter, just some guy in his apartment. Maybe he was looking past her, staring into the night sky. Maybe he was a mannequin, a trick of the light, but the lights in his apartment were always off. One evening, she decided to test something. At exactly 8 p.m., she turned off her own lights, shrouding her room in darkness. Her window became a black mirror, reflecting only her faint outline. But across the street, he was still there, watching, perfectly still. She waited some minutes, then she turned the lights on again. With a slowly movement, Lily raised her hand to see if he really was looking at her. The shadow across the street didn't respond, but as Lily breathed a sigh of relief, the man on the other side raised his arm in a slow motion to greet her. Lily's stomach twisted. He was watching her. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. "It's nothing," she whispered. "You're being paranoid." But even with her eyes shut, she felt him watching her. That sick, crawling sensation of being watched dug into her skin. The air in her room felt heavy, wrong. When she finally worked up the nerve to open her eyes, her breath caught in her throat. The man was gone, not at the window anymore. The light in her room flickered, and everything went dark. Was that really a man staring through the window? Or just a trick of her mind, playing a game with her? But either way, she felt someone was watching her. Then it must be true, right? You can think about that as we move to the next tale. The third story is called Eyes in the Night. It was a cool autumn evening when Emma and her best friend, Lucy, walked home from their late study session. The streets were quiet, just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. They chatted and laughed, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the empty streets. As they reached the corner of their block, Lucy gave Emma a quick hug before heading off in the opposite direction. Emma waved her friend goodbye, and as she turned to walk the last few blocks home, a sense of unease began to crawl up her spine. The streets were darker now, the streetlights casting long shadows on the ground. She pulled her jacket tighter around her body and quickened her pace, trying to shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. At first, she dismissed it as nothing, a trick of the mind, the creeping darkness making her more paranoid than usual. But then she heard it, a faint sound behind her, the soft scrape of footsteps against the wet pavement. Emma stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned around quickly, expecting to see someone walking close behind, but there was no one. Just the empty street stretching into darkness. Shaking her head, she continued walking, but the feeling persisted. The soft thud of footsteps resumed, too faint to be certain but there nonetheless. Emma's breath quickened, her pulse throbbing in her throat. She could hear the footsteps drawing closer, matching her own pace. Her eyes darted back again. Nothing, no one, but the noise, it didn't stop. The footsteps were still there, following her, inching closer with every step she took. Her pace increased, her mind racing with every possible scenario. She could feel the weight of the air around her, thick and suffocating, as though something unseen was closing in. She nearly broke into a run, her legs carrying her faster now, adrenaline spiking in her veins. She reached her apartment building, the door to the lobby. She yanked it open and rushed inside, locking the door behind her. Finally, she could breathe. Emma took a few moments to steady her breathing, her chest heaving as she leaned against the wall of the lobby. She had made it inside, she was safe. No one could follow her now. The sense of being pursued seemed to fade, replaced by a strange sense of security. She walked upstairs to her apartment, went inside, and flipped on all the lights, reassuring herself with the brightness that filled the rooms. She dropped her bag on the floor, peeled off her jacket, and headed to the bathroom to wash her face. The tension had melted, and soon, she pushed the unsettling feeling out of her mind. She made herself some tea, sat on the couch, and tried to distract herself with a TV show. But her mind kept drifting back to the strange feeling of being watched. The footsteps that followed her. She brushed it off, just a trick of her mind. Nothing more. 30 minutes later, she flicked off the lights and climbed into bed, pulling the covers over her. The darkness enveloped her, but she felt comforted by the familiar surroundings. As she closed her eyes and began to drift into sleep, she remembered, the curtain, it wasn't fully shut, just a small gap, but enough for someone to see inside her room, enough for someone to watch her as she lay there, vulnerable and asleep. Emma sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she should just ignore it, but something about the quiet darkness of her room made her feel uneasy. Slowly, she turned toward the window. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, her fingers trembling, and that's when she saw it, eyes staring at her through the small gap in the curtain. A man was standing just outside her window, his face illuminated by the faint light from the street lamp. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring into her room. Her blood ran cold. How long had he been there? The thought hit her like a punch to the gut. She lived on the ground floor, where anyone could walk right up to her window and peer inside. She tried to steady her breath, her thoughts a chaotic mess of panic and confusion. She couldn't make out his features from this distance, but the outline of his face was clear, pale, expressionless, his eyes dark and locked on hers. She couldn't move. Her mind raced as she scanned the room, searching for something, anything, she could use to defend herself. He was still there. Her stomach churned. She had to do something. But her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. After what felt like an eternity, she finally gathered the strength to reach for the curtains. She didn't take her eyes off the man as she slid the fabric shut, blocking his gaze from her view. Her hands shook uncontrollably, but she double-checked the lock on the window. It was secure, but the unsettling feeling still lingered in her chest. She tried to calm herself, but sleep wouldn't come. The night dragged on, and she spent the rest of the evening in a restless, half-awake state. Her mind kept returning to that man, his face, his stillness, the way he watched her like he knew she could do nothing to stop him. The next morning, Emma heard something on the news while getting ready for work. A man had been arrested for stalking and killing 4 young women in the area. His pattern was chilling. He had been targeting girls her age. The police said he would often watch his victims for days before striking, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The man she had seen outside her window. He was the same man they had arrested. Now it's time for tonight's last bedtime story. The fourth and last story is called Unknown Number. James groggily rubbed his eyes as his phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen cast a dull glow over his face, making the dark room feel even more suffocating. Unknown Number wrote, "I'm outside." The clock read 2:47 a.m. James sat up, the lingering haze of sleep quickly fading. He blinked at the message, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated, then climbed out of bed, shuffling toward the window. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. The street below was empty. No cars, no people. The glow of a distant street lamp barely illuminated the sidewalk. Nothing. James let out a shaky breath. Probably a wrong number. Just as he turned back toward bed, another message. Unknown Number wrote, "I'm inside." James froze, his fingers tightening around the phone. Slowly, carefully, he scanned the dark apartment. His front door was locked. The windows were shut. Nothing had been disturbed. His breath quickened as he fumbled to type a reply the unknown number. Who is this? A small bubble appeared. Someone was typing. Then, just as quickly, the bubble vanished. James' mouth was dry. Every shadow in the room suddenly felt deeper, every creak in the walls more sinister. Who was texting him? And what did they mean by "I am inside"? As James went to lay in his bed again after nothing happened, he laid on his side, facing the door. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number wrote, "Look behind you." The air turned thick, heavy. James felt it before he turned. The change in the air, the whisper of breath against his neck, and the weight on the mattress behind him, just like there was a person lying down beside him. His body locked up, muscles refusing to obey. Every nerve in his body screamed, "Don't turn around." But the silence pressed in. His ears strained. Then, a whisper, right beside his ear. "Look at me." James's throat clenched shut. His phone slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The bed shifted. Something moved. A shadow stretched long against the floor in the dim glow of his phone screen. James squeezed his eyes shut. It's a dream. It's sleep paralysis. It's not real. But then he felt it. Cold fingers curling around his wrist. He jerked away with a strangled gasp, stumbling off the bed, crashing against the nightstand. His lamp tumbled over, smashing to the floor. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling for the switch. The light flicked on. James looked around. The bed was empty. Nothing was there. His blankets were neatly in place. His pillow undisturbed. The apartment was silent except for his own ragged breathing. James's chest heaved. Had he imagined it? A night terror? A hallucination? His phone buzzed again. With shaking hands, he picked it up. Unknown number wrote, "See you soon." The screen glitched, distorted. For just a second, an image flashed across it, his own reflection. Except, behind him, in the mirror, he swore that he saw a figure stood there. Right behind him, with a hand around his neck. And that concludes tonight's descent into the darkness and the depths of fear. I don't know about you, dear listeners, but questions still linger in my mind. Was it real? Or were they simply the echoes of people's own fear, taking shape in the dark? Even as we end tonight's bedtime stories, countless others are lurking in the shadows, waiting to be told. Join us again soon, when we return with more bedtime stories to haunt your night, disturb your sleep, and that lingers in your mind after turning off the lights. Until then, sleep tight and sweet dreams. And try not to let the darkness creep in. We'll be waiting for you till next time, right here on Sinister Radio.